the Boleskine house. Yay!
It's going to be good.
So, what is, who is, where is the Boleskine house? Actually, it's a really, really very cool place. It is in the Highlands of Scotland in a little parish known as Boleskine. And the property, the house, as most people may or may not know of it, if you've ever heard of it, we're going to get to sort of that infamous side of it. It is sitting up on the hillside overlooking Loch Ness. It's got phenomenal views of the loch. It's absolutely stunning. And it was constructed in, I believe, 1760 by Alexander Campbell Fraser. So that's kind of the little history snippet behind it. And the other interesting thing is, for everybody out there, is that I was lucky enough to, in a series of very strange circumstances and connections, end up as part of the Boleskine House Foundation. So I am their historical content creator. And that means that I'm in charge of looking into the real history of the property and bringing that to life. So we're going to start talking about the house. So Ian, you did a little digging around.
Mm-hmm.
What did you find? I'm really curious to see what you found. I think I know what you found, but
yeah, what I really find interesting in the history of the property is that it was once owned by Aleister Crowley.
Right. And everybody's interested in the ownership of Aleister Crowley, except me.
Well, just
it's not that I'm disinterested. It's just that it really is such a tiny part of the house.
Yeah, well, he didn't own it very long. It was only 20 years or so, I think.
About 11 years. Yeah.
Oh,
he
was
bought
it even
in 1899 and he sold it in 1913, I believe. Yeah.
But that's sort of my interest that I sort of stumbled across just with my work within the paranormal field. Right. And anybody who's within the paranormal knows who Aleister Crowley was.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's an interesting thing, right? Is that I say, the history and mystery surrounding the Boleskine house. There's an infamy there because of Crowley, right? But like I said, he's really a very small part of the house's history. The house is very old, being built in 1750. I mean, it's going on now to be, 240 years old and then some. So, 12 years or so of that amount of time is really minuscule, right? The other sort of infamous or famous owner of the property was Jimmy Page.
Jimmy Page, right.
Yeah, he purchased it in 1970 and he owned it until 1992. Now, this is where this whole story gets really crazy. As I said before we went live, I had been writing an article for the foundations. They have a journal that they put out. It's much like a magazine, and it goes out to sort of upper echelon members that belong to the Boleskine House Foundation. And before we go any further, I just want to talk about that a little bit. Not to rah, but, maybe to rah a little bit, because they're doing great things. It's a newly formed foundation. The home is owned by a new owner. And he purchased the property in April of 2019 with the intent of restoring the property back to, I won't say back to 1760, but at least back to a representation of a number of centuries in which the house has survived. And so the idea was to bring the facade back to the original, right, to what it would have looked like at that time period, or at least in the late 1700s. And then from there, kind of move through the property in various ways, including some of the the Victorian elements and some of the Georgian elements, and then some of the more modern elements as well. And of course, in restoring a property now, you can't really go back to 1760 because there was no hydro, there was no running water, there was none of those things.
Right.
And when you're doing a restoration project now, everything still has to meet code. It has to
correct. Yeah.
code. So there is that. Right. And there has been some chatter on, some forums and that it's like, oh, it's not really going to be historical because you can't. And the idea here is that they're not trying to make it historical. They're restoring the heritage. And the heritage is not the same thing as the historical. Right. So heritage retains certain features, but we know under heritage, even here in Ontario, that you still have to meet modern expectations in terms of things like utilities in the home, fire prevention, all of those kinds of things. So
now, once the building is restored, what is the plan?
For
the building? Is it going to become like a tourist destination, or they're going to turn it into a hotel, or
it will not be a hotel. So what it will be is a community space. So the idea is that tourists will indeed be able to come, they will be able to tour, they will be able to go around the grounds. The property itself still retains 22 acres. Originally it was 100. And it still retains 22 of those original acres. The property is lush. They're going to install a beautiful butterfly and bee garden into the estate. So it'll be beautiful with wildflowers and natural wildlife, which there is an abundance of. Let's just say that all around this home is still quite a rugged rock hillside and a lot of pine. So we still have a lot of really gorgeous features around this home. There's also a family cemetery on the site. Now there's a roadway going between it today because we have a major roadway that runs between the property and where the cemetery is, but the cemetery was originally on the shores of Loch Ness. It's still there. So when I say the shores, it's not literally right on the water, but it's overlooking that gorgeous view of the loch. So it's just got all of these gorgeous features. And then what they want to do is they're hoping that next to the property on an additional 5 acres, they want to build geo cottages. So cottages that are self-contained, that do not need outside hydro or anything, but small cottages built into the sort of the facade of the hillside so that they're not glaringly standing out and looking hideous, that people can come and stay in and then spend time on the property. It will be available for yoga retreats, weddings, workshops, tours, all kinds of fantastic things. So the idea is that they want to really open it up to the community around them. Instead of sequestering the home, making it private or turning it into a B&B or some sort of thing like that, they really want the community to be able to come back to the property and utilize it. So I think that that's a fantastic sort of forward-thinking way of handling this property that will help to remove some of the stigma that's attached to it. Because unfortunately, locally, the home has a number of people that are not fans, let's just say. Right? So we're working really hard and to work with the community, right? And that's my job, is to make sure that the house is represented in the best possible light. So we're not hiding anything. We're not hiding the fact that Lester Crowley was there. We're not hiding the fact that Jimmy Page purchased the property because Lester Crowley owned the property. What we're doing is we are showing all of the property, everything about it, from the time that it was built by Fraser to the time that it is now. You discovered all these things about Lester Crowley. So let's talk about that, right? Because it's, again, when you go on the forums out there, that is for the most part what people mention. that the house was, owned by Crowley, and that he went there to perform magic rituals and to,
he was an occultist. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm on sort of two sides of the fence over that. Of course, we know who Crowley was on the one side. We know him as the occultist. We know him as, Thelema and all of these other sort of things that he brought to the forefront. He spent time with Madame Blavatsky, who we've spoken about before on the program, right? And he spent time with the Golden Dawn and a number of other organizations. So, and he founded his own OTO organization, right? So,
yeah.
So we have all of these things that Crowley was doing, but and I'm kind of the that's only one side of Crowley, right? That's not the other side of Crowley. The other side of Crowley is equally as interesting. He was a spoiled rich kid, right? He grew up in a family with wealth. He really never had to do much of anything in his life. He didn't have to go out to work or do all of these things. So he was one of those people in the 1800s in the Victorian era that had the ability to travel on a whim. And he climbed Everest. He was a mountaineer, right?
Oh, really?
He climbed.
That I did not know.
Yeah, he climbed Everest. He spent time in Mexico with the Order of the Golden Dawn. He was in New York City right around the time of the First World War, stirring the pot of political activism. There was a lot of things that he was doing, and there is some very interesting proof that he may have operated as a spy for British intelligence.
Huh.
So, was his occult something that he truly was part of him? I think it was, but I also think that some of it gave him an opportunity to get into some of these organizations where there were certain people that were doing things that, shouldn't have been happening, like funding the Nazi Party and all of these other things. And if he truly was, this British intelligence spy, how cool would that make him? Really? I mean, It goes beyond just the occult status. It really makes a much more rounded person, but one who I think that we have to look at in a more respected light, perhaps. I think he gets a lot of bashing from people because they see him as this sort of, older in his life. I think, the picture of him like this with the pyramid on his head, people look at him like he was some crazy person, and he was highly intelligent and
well, he was also an author and a poet.
Yes. I mean, he was kind of if I think of Oscar Wilde could have gone on in his life, I believe he may have become a little bit more like Aleister Crowley. He just didn't have that opportunity. But there were hints even in Oscar Wilde's personality of, some of these things too, right? So there were a number of people moving in certain circles in that time that, would have rubbed shoulders and would have probably been highly interesting people to talk to. Crowley being one of them for sure, right? So we look at what happens with his persona. People don't look at him as a whole person. They look at him as this occult person, and then they look at him as some dark, sinister, evil, maniacal, Satanistic, sort of Satan worshiper. And really, when you understand those types of societies or those types of followers, that's not really what it was about at all.